Hi listeners, it's your host Arthur Lonsdale. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's such a pleasure to have you here. We've actually changed the podcast name from the Collective Institute of Ideas to Pitching Passion. Shorter name, more meaningful, and hopefully something you can remember. We're so grateful to have you listening today. I can't wait for you to listen to this episode about Keith. It's truly extraordinary. We've actually made it into a 2-part episode. If you haven't already subscribed, we would love for you today to subscribe. And if you've got any ideas or feedback, please comment below or check out our website and get in touch. Wow, today, everybody, we are immensely privileged to have Keith Bulfin with us. Keith, I'm going to be frank here. I don't think knowingly ever chatted to someone with such a fascinating life story, working undercover for the DEA with drug cartels, experiencing prison, working to help reduce human trafficking. You've had so much experience, haven't you?
Yes. It's been an incredible journey, really, when you think about it. I was just a banker running a small investment bank of my own, and then I had 2 South Americans who were using my bank for investment purposes, and I got to know them a lot better than thought they were very wealthy coffee plantation owners from South America. As it turned out, after I got a knock on the door one morning from the federal police, state police, the FBI and the DEA and the Mexican federal police, that the 2 bankers I was dealing with were the main bankers for the Mexican drug cartels, and actually were running the washing machines for the cartels, not only for Mexicans but from the Colombians. And they were fugitives on the run. And here I was managing their financial operations, and they in turn had notified their colleagues in Mexico City that I was a very creative banker. And the US authorities saw this as an opening. Maybe we can get Keith to run a covert bank and be the next architect of the Colombian and Mexican cartels. And that's exactly what
it's the most
bizarre situation.
Yeah. So tell us what they meant by creative banker.
Basically, I was able to move money around, and I was quite good at that. So these 2 Mexicans had money in Chile and Argentina, and I was moving money to London into Europe for them. And they then, they heard this word creative banker by Carlos Cabal, which is one of the Mexican cartel leaders, that Keith was a creative banker. I don't think they realised what the term was, but they kept emphasising, you're a creative banker. And I think, so in essence, I became the financial architect of the cartels, because I was like the JP Morgan of the Mexican cartels. I was investing their money with the approval of the US government and planning their investments and their strategies, which they thought was quite good. Basically, the cartels today are a major corporation. They're a very sophisticated group. They have an enormous amount of money. And to give you some sort of idea, according to the US Department of Justice, the money that the 5 major families earned in 2025 were far greater than the 2 largest financial institutions in America, Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase. So that gives you an idea. They control the global market of cocaine and other drugs, and they have a global market with representation in Australia, Asia and Europe. And in addition to that, they use AI technology, they use cybercrime, they use drones, they use robotics to go through tunnels across the border. So they're very sophisticated, much more than what we see in the films and television. And I think it gave me a bit of an insight in how they operated.
It's like anything in life, there's just so many details and complexities that one doesn't understand if you're not really in that. But let's move back into the story. There you are, this very bright young chap working, you've set up an investment bank. Join the dots for me, because so you end up meeting this guy. I think we can say the name Carlos. Is that
yes.
Right? Meeting Carlos, you end up in jail. Was that before you met Carlos or after?
It was after. So basically they said that these two people are controlling financial operations. It would be ideal for you to become the key to their financial operations. But what we're going to do is they're here under false passports, so we're going to arrest them and throw them in prison. And we need you to befriend them. So the only way we can do that is we've got to make you look like they've caused you a problem. And so the plan was that I was going to befriend them and convince them that I could be trusted to be their next banker. I only saw one movie called Traffic. All I knew about Mexican drug cartels. So I said, this won't happen. Not in a million years. And they said, we'll comb through everything you've done over the last 20 years and we'll find something and we'll put you in prison with these two guys. And they did, and they found a valuation. I apparently had talked to the valuer by increasing the valuation, and they said, this is what we're going to charge you for. And I end up being charged, and at the time I thought I could fight this. I got a team of lawyers. They cut off my money supply because they were so convinced that they wanted me to be this banker. So they froze all my bank accounts. They did everything they could to convince me that I could take this wrong. And I kept saying, no, I would not. And then they said, your son is turning 18. We're going to destroy his life if you don't play ball. That was the end of the story. So I couldn't afford to risk my son being charged. And they would have come up with any charge. And I know that it's very hard to believe, but governments can manipulate a person for their own advantage. And this happens all the time. And certainly in my case. So I ended up inside a maximum security prison and a maximum security unit with 20 inmates, 17 never to be released. And 3 of us were bankers. And it wasn't until 60 Minutes did a program on me that they said, this doesn't stack up. This had to be arranged beforehand. Because if you had committed a white-collar offence, you'd be in a prison farm. No one in Australia has ever been in a maximum security prison for committing a white-collar offence. Yet you're in a maximum security unit, and with 3 bankers, 3 of you, 2 Mexicans and yourself. And then you come from prison and you go straight to San Diego, and then you open up a covert bank. If you dot the I's and cross the T's, is exactly a DEA set up from the very beginning. And then they produced a letter, which I didn't know. I didn't even know this letter existed until after I wrote the book. But they produced this letter from a Supreme Court judge. In the letter, it contains confirmation that the Supreme Court judge and the authorities had a meeting with the American government, including the DEA, stated that I would be involved and recruited for this operation. And so 60 Minutes with their journalists and their investigating have managed to find that letter. And that letter today is gold for me because it's written confirmation and that I not only worked for the DEA, but also the whole operation, as far as the prison term is concerned, was all planted and manipulated in order to get me to work for the US government. And that's it. And it was an incredible in itself. It was an emotional journey in jail.
Because we know with the complexity of the deals that you're working on, so they got you in.
It's conspiracy to defraud over the valuations.
Yeah. Is that, what does that mean in layman's terms? And did they have a case, or was it complete fabrication? Because looking at it, you are the biggest asset for them in terms of being able to help them get these people.
They said that you have to plead guilty to conspiracy to defraud over the valuation. So I went to court. But a conspiracy is 2 people, not 1. So the conspiracy would be the valuer and myself. So they charged the valuer, but he went to court and the charge against him was dropped. So there was no conspiracy. It was a trumped up charge. And I ended up going to prison because I had to plead guilty. And that's what transpired. And then the point is that they made is from the Mexicans, you have to build an element of trust. Yes, I worked for them outside the system, but to be in the prison with them and to have a charge which they could relate to, they understood it, and they thought, okay, this guy is one of us, and that developed that charge. But I had to spend time. It was 3 years in a maximum security prison. So it wasn't, and they promised me the world financially. But the point is that they said, you deliver these two guys on a silver plate and we'll give you $5 million, which was a lot of money way back then. But the thing is, I went to boarding school and you don't rat on friends. And I knew that I couldn't trust agencies. So I thought to myself, there's no way I would deliver these up. I've spent 3 years with them, building friendship. And I realised later that if things went pear-shaped, these two people could save my life. And that's exactly what happened.
It's the most extraordinary. Sorry, we're going to jump ahead a bit. You've got this amazing friendship, and then you're set up to bring the bad guys in, as it were. You go to the US, you get given a sort of fake family to live with and be with, working undercover, and you are using your creative, bright mind to do all sorts for the cartels. And then it comes to a point where, and it's so fascinating when you tell your story about how close you are with your instinct and how you can't trust the cartels, but you can't trust the agencies. Because, as they put it to you at one point, the life expectancy of working undercover for an agency is 6 months, unless you're pulled out. You're always having to triple plan, and it's so interesting the way you talk about this. Clearly, you're such a man of detail, the way you map out all these different exit routes. For example, you talked about your time in Mexico and knowing all the routes out to the airport. But we're now going to move on to the point where the DEA tries to get you to wear a wire. So the DEA say to you, you've got to wear a wire. You refuse, and they say, fine, we're going to get this other guy in the room. And of course, you knowing that whole context, you know that the cartel don't let unknown members into a meeting. Anyway, out comes this guy, Al, really experienced, but you can see his head is not in gear. He's not focused. He has no regard to hear about what you have to say about the preparation. You've got a really bad feeling in your stomach about this. The two of you go to this meeting, and he gets quizzed about his investment banker knowledge about interest rate arbitrage. He doesn't know anything. So they quickly figure out he's not a banker, despite the fact that he's saying he's a banker. And then he orders a coffee in Spanish, and they're like, also, you're Colombian. And this extraordinary story whereby they end the meeting straight away, but then you both still go to the meeting later that day, by which point he gets a gun, and sadly there's a gunfight, he gets killed, and you then have to escape to America with your family, quote unquote your family, and then the cartel end up finding you. And you at this point, Keith, it's remarkable, you reflect on this state whereby the cartels, they'll come to after your family if you've crossed them, but if you come to them, then they're likely to leave your family alone. So you come back to Mexico and you say to them, listen, I will protect you, but just leave my family alone. I've had a few of your backs. Can we call it peace? And it basically seems like that's what's happened. Would you agree with that?
Yes, they have a policy where, exactly as you just said, if they keep chasing you, they will not only eliminate you, but your whole family and extended family, whereas you go back to them to face the music, so to speak. Then they'll execute you, not your family. But in this case, I always had a feeling I couldn't trust the agencies. There's always jealousy within the agencies. And also, you have one or two agents who are moles for the cartels, so you've got to be very careful. The deputy director of the DEA said to me, we do have moles within our organisation, we just don't know who they are. So you've got to be careful. So every time I went to Mexico, there was a 25% chance my operation would be exposed, and as a result I was virtually walking into a trap. So I couldn't trust them. So I played chess, but I also had a lot of knowledge on how the SAS operate, particularly the British SAS. They plan every operation. They look at what could go wrong, and if it does go wrong, what do you do? And every time I did an operation, I planned my exit strategies, I planned where the meeting is, I planned if, all the scenarios that could go wrong and what I can do if it did. And I'd go through my head. So if I had a meeting like today at 10 o'clock, I would be up at 4. I would go to the meeting place. I would look at all the exit strategies and I'll plan my move. I'd go through the whole conversation 100 times, so I knew exactly what I had to say and what I had to do, and I planned for everything that could possibly go wrong. And I think that's what saved my life, and ended up working for the Cartels for over 7 years. Most of the people that go undercover, particularly from law enforcement agencies, are virtually cowboys. They want to be party with the criminals, they want to socialise with them, they want to drink, take to drugs, party with the girls. I never did. I was a professional from day one. I kept saying to the Cartels, I'm your banker. I don't want to socialise. I'm your banker. I'm here to give you investment advice and also to bank your money. And they respected that. But at the same time, I kept thinking to myself, if things go wrong, I think the Mexicans are the ones that would protect me. In other words, they in turn, I had to think to myself, I have to give something to the DEA so there's no real issues with them, but at the same time protect the major players in Mexico. And that's what I did. So when it went pear-shaped and I was executed, I came back to Mexico and I faced the music with them. And they in turn decided it was a 50-50 because it was the Colombians involved. 50-50 whether I'd be executed or not. And at the end of the day, they decided that I hadn't exposed them, I hadn't given them up, they hadn't lost any assets, and they decided that they would let me live. And today they protect me, which is good. But it's...
And can you talk about what you did give? Because to keep the amazing, you managed to play on 2 teams in a sense. Can you talk about the things that you did give to the DEA?
It's basically in terms of small cartels that have sold drugs. So you end up giving information in terms of where the drugs are being distributed. And you also give up certain assets that they own across the border and where they transfer the money. But from the DEA's perspective, what they wanted was more the encyclopedia of the financial operations of the cartels. And that I could provide how they moved their money, that they used an offshore bank, what offshore entities they used, how they set up shell companies, where they invested their money. They bought stocks and shares, real estate, they bought paintings, they bought companies. They were like the mafia in America, who initially were in prostitution and gambling, but then expanded into real enterprises, real businesses which could generate. And they also then educated their the new family members who end up going to university, getting MBAs and taking over that side of the business, legitimate businesses. And that's what the cartels do now. They run legitimate businesses as well as their criminal activities as well. It's a massive business.
And Keith, can you talk about survival and what are the human learnings that we can have from your experience? Certainly what seems relevant is planning and being obsessed around preparation. But there must be things that helped you just by the way you're wired, right? Being aware of your surroundings, having a gut feel, reading people. Give us a sense of what some pragmatic takeaways that you have.
I have 2 assets which the American government recognise. One is face recognition. If I go into a restaurant, I can scan the people and then walk out, and then identify certain people a day later. Second was navigation ability. So if you blindfolded me and took me to a location, I could virtually work out exactly where I was. But I kept going back to how I survived. Was one is mentally, I swim every day, and I swim and exercise. I keep myself fit. I realise that a lot of people get in my business working undercover, they have not only stress, emotional journey, they face fear. I seem to able to survive that. I'm able to deal with my own demons my own way. And I think I deal with that by swimming. I swim in the ocean, the cold sea every day. And if I get emotional at all, I do it in the water. So what I saw and what I witnessed through my journey as an undercover agent is difficult to comprehend. And I think the American agencies, they do offer support in terms of psychologists and that type of thing. But I think in my case, I have to deal with myself. The term in imprisonment, the working undercover, facing death, having a gun pointed to your head, being told that you are an undercover agent and you're trying to convince them, the person pointing the gun at you, you are not. But then I try and have it departments basically working through how I'm going to manage this. I even think about this even before the operation. And even having a meeting with government agencies, I try and work out what they're going to ask, how I'm going to be ambushed, and how I'm going to cope. And then when I do have emotional journeys, I think, okay, I'm emotional here, but there are people far worse off than I am. So I've got to think, okay, I'm better off, I'm alive, I'm healthy. So if someone's facing cancer or battling a battle over other tragic within their family and their life, how do they cope? So I've got to be stronger than they are. So that's how I do it.
Keith, I'm thinking sometimes in life people have news that hits them and that can be really scary. Maybe it's losing a job, but then other things, other fears can be a bit more long term. People can be anxious. Let's say people who are quite young and they have financial troubles and then they're struggling to get a job to sustain living where they live, or or maybe they have like confidence issues. How do you have any view on how these people can deal with those challenges?
Yeah, I do. I know people face mental health issues, but I think people face suicide as well. And I often think I'm probably the perfect person they could come and talk to because of what I've gone through, being in a prison, being interviewed by FBI and the DEA, because you have to do a lie detector test over every operation, and at the same time being in a room having guns point at my head and being told I'm an undercover agent for the DEA, and by the time I count 10 you're going to be executed. I face all those. So I know and I've met so many psychologists and met people who deal with situations, but none of them have actually experienced their own life. If you get a psychologist or someone who is an expert in mental health, they've got the knowledge and the academic ability, but they've never been in the situation themselves. A lot of them have not. And you've got to be in my situation. You've got to face the elements yourself. How do you handle that? And you've got to be able to talk to someone how I dealt with it, and then I'm in a position to help them. For example, in the Middle East, working for the CIA and the FBI, two of us, there's a girl and myself. And so we got caught by militia just on the border of Syria and Jordan. So we were captured for two days, and they did things to us, to her and to myself. So when we were rescued, the female agent with me was in a fetal position. She was hysterical, and I was going through my demons as well at the same time. But I spent my time trying to comfort her and get her relaxed and talk to her. And then when we got back to the hotel, the American government took her and stuck her on an aircraft and flew her to Washington and put her into a hospital and gave her all the support. And in my case, they sent me back to the Middle East to do operations. So they never didn't look at me and said, okay, you're facing the same, what you just experienced in the last 2 days of being in captivity, we need you to see a psychologist. They just said, no, the best thing you can do is go back to work. And that's what I did. And she's never recovered. And I never had anyone come and sit down with me and talk through the issues. I dealt with it myself. And I think in terms of you, and I keep thinking about what other people have experienced worse than me. And I kept saying, I'm better off. I've survived. I'm healthy. I'm okay. And there are times where you've lost your job, you're down on your luck, you've got $2 in the bank account, and you really don't know how you're going to cope. But the best way about coping is sit back and say, I'm healthy. I've got abilities. So I need to get up off the sofa and I need to be able to get on with my life. And ring me, if you like. I think in people who suicidal, like there was a young guy in prison who was being released. He was a drug dealer, not a drug dealer, a drug taker. And he wanted to impress the parole board, so I helped him do his tie. And we practiced that. I talked to him. He got his parole, but 2 days later he committed suicide. So the prison authorities said, oh, but we gave more of the right treatment. They don't understand, because the people within the prison system, within the justice system, and people outside think they know what they're doing, but it's all academic. They can't relate. And this young man, who was 21 years of age, he'd been in prison for over 2 years, released, and 2 days later, he committed suicide. Where the thing is, I always think the wrong people are addressing the issue. So if someone's got a mental health, got problems with suicidal attempts, you need to talk to someone who's been through the same experience and has come out the other side. And in my case, I think I can relate to a lot of these people and help them solve their problems. And I think it's just a matter of talking through what I experienced, how I cope with it. I've never had anyone, I had psychologists in prison, but outside, dealing with working undercover for 23 years, I haven't had anyone, not a single person.
Keith, improving the relationship with one's inner critic, for example. I mean, when you're really up shit's creek, there must be a big importance in having a voice of compassion with you that is there saying, you're going to be fine, you've got this. Is that true or not?
Yeah.
And did you feel like that kind of thing can help people?
It does. You need someone who can listen, but at the same time, you don't want someone, you need to listen to what the person's problem is. And then you need to talk about how the problem is not a big issue. And you need to, like today, I'm a patrol member of lifesaving. I rescued a girl from drowning 4 weeks ago. It was 800 metres offshore and she was going under, and she was a triathlete, but she had a panic attack. So it was a matter of swimming to her, putting her on her back and talking to her. And in talking to her, controlling her and bringing her in and talking about her life. So she started to recover from the panic attack. That's just one instance, for example. But there are many other instances of similar. I'm just trying to think of situations where people have been suicidal, and you need to talk to them about their journey and then talk a little bit about your own journey and make them feel more positive about their life and what their opportunities are. And like I teach another...
And what they do have.
Yeah. Like I take a girl swimming once a week and she lost a leg to cancer. So up to the hip, basically. And she's been battling cancer. So she swims 2 kilometres. But it's all about her mental preparation. So talking to her and telling her she can do this and tell her that we can do 550s, 525s. And she does this work, and then talking about her issues that she has for the week, how we can cope for that. She talks about work issues, how she's not getting support for getting a new artificial leg. So you talk about what are the problems she's going through, and you understand what those problems are, and then give her a guidance on how she can overcome that. And so I'm her candle. That's what it is.
Keith, that's so lovely that you do that, and thanks so much for sharing. What I want to hit on though is your voice, Keith's voice with Keith, because I don't know what that looked like when you were really young, and what that looked like when you were going through the most traumatic or tense moments undercover. But surely you have got that place where you're on your own and you can talk yourself into a calm place to get through that chaos. And that internal voice has been important for you in dealing with chaos.
It is. It's ironic how you can be in a situation. When I'm in a difficult situation, I seem to become very calm. And although I'm talking to the person concerned, I still have this sort of inner peace within me. I'm trying to work out, I'm talking, but at the same time I'm trying to work out how I'm going to cope with this situation. And I try and go through how difficult, what I'm in and how I'm going to get out of this. And that's how I deal with it. I think, you give you another instance, so when you carry out an operation, sometimes you're covering up. So when you get debriefed by the FBI and the DEA, you're covering up on certain aspects. So the FBI and the DEA want to know exactly what transpired, and you don't want to give them exactly, because you're protecting yourself. And you got to try, and it's like walking through a minefield, because they're going to ask you a set of questions. They've wired you up, and you've got to be able to lie basically on that test, and that's quite daunting. But I seem to be able to plan because I don't go into a meeting unprepared. I'm completely prepared for what's going to take place, what if scenarios. So I work out the questions they're going to ask, and I work out the answers I'm going to give. I don't try and get anxious. If there are situations occurring, I think I've got to be calm, and I'm in a difficult situation. I've got to work my way through this. And the best way is to be calm, be rational, and think ahead of how I'm going to cope with this and how I'm going to walk away from it. And that's what I'm saying in terms of my cancer survivor, or people who are drowning and you're talking to them, people facing suicide, or is talking to them, understanding their situation, but talking to them about what I went through and relate it to what they're going through. And as a result, that makes a difference. And I emphasise that a lot. If you're going through cancer, the best person you can deal with is a cancer survivor, a person who's dealt with it themselves. And a person who's gone broke, gone to jail, come out and trying to get his life back together. You need to talk to someone who's had that same experience. Because the people with the same experience can relate how they cope with it, how they got back on their horse and are able to ride off into the sunset. Every day is a challenge for most people.
Yeah.
And so, whatever the challenges are, just get dressed, go out that front door, feel confident in yourself, and just say, I can do this. Whatever the challenge you're facing, I can do this. I can accept the challenge. I can do it.
Keith, in dealing with these worlds, was it quite confusing at times when you'd be working with people who would commit very ruthless crimes? Was it conflicting because you'd see their good nature as well, and also just the complexity of their systems and structures that they might have grown up with?
I think so, but it's like agencies and police and law enforcement, there are elements where they'll manipulate you, and because it's a game for them, and they'll lie and cheat. Agencies do. Criminals do exactly the same. And you are with a criminal who has committed atrocities, But you've got to think, okay, I'm dealing with this person. You've got to put that aside, leave that. Because if you're dealing with someone who can snap their fingers and execute you on the spot, then you're not going to be able to focus, because that's all you're focusing on. You've got to go beyond that. So often with these criminal groups, I just start talking about family. Say, how's your family? Talk about their childhood. Talk about what interests them. And try and talk about other things. And try and understand the person you're dealing with. And he's ruthless. These people are, the Mexican cartels are the most ruthless people in the world. Even the Russian mafia are scared of them. When you first meet them, I'm trembling with fear. I'm shaking, I'm perspiring. And the Mexicans the cartel leader will smell you. And they say in Spanish, I can smell his fear. And if they smell your fear, they then trust you. That's the message I got. So I didn't have to act that part. That came automatically to me, shaking with fear and perspiring, facing them. But I still could have a conversation with them, still talk about, they'd be talking about moving money or how they invest, and they talk about if they lose any money, the consequences are quite severe. So they're mentioning this to you. So you don't focus on that aspect. I say, moving money is my expertise. Doing the right investment is my expertise. And then I would talk about how good the investment will be, but people do make mistakes. And I said, and you can't go after a person who's made a mistake, because this money and investments are manipulated by markets. So if you really want to go after everybody, talk about how the economy works. And I earned their trust, because they kept saying to me, you're a real professional banker, aren't you? And I talk about the consequences of the market. I didn't just say, yes, give me the money and I'll bank it. Where are you going to bank it? How are you going to bank it?
You know those little moments that lift your day? A smile, the sun coming out, or a piece of chocolate. Audrey's Chocolates have been handcrafting chocolate for over 70 years. Chocolate to die for. It comes in beautiful boxes that make for the perfect gift. Or bars of chocolate that feed daily joy. Discover your moment of joy by visiting audreyschocolates.co.uk and treat yourself to 10% off using the code TheCollective10.
I talk about the investments and say, why aren't you investing into these sort of type of activities? So branch out of your criminal activity. I wouldn't say criminal, I would say branch out of your current activities and invest for the long term. And over a period of time, I earned their respect. I knew who I was dealing with, as you are with terrorists and human traffickers, who are all talking about money, making money, not worrying about the human beings or the girls that are selling for the sex trade industry. They're not worried about them. They're just worried. It's just a product to them. All they want to do is make money and have control. There's this feeling of control and money. So what you've got to do is say to them, talk about how they can invest their money, about their investments, how they can't really control the investments, and try and switch their mind off what they're currently doing.
It's just completely focusing on their interest, right? Like, it could be like their kids, their world, their money, all about what's going to work for them. Was there ever a time when you met someone, maybe they were on the periphery of the activities you were around, or maybe they were quite central, where they'd done something so awful or they behaved in such a way that you wanted almost like a personal vendetta against them, and that you achieved that to some degree?
Absolutely. You face cartel leaders I know who used to go out and shoot people. I need to be entertained today, so go and find someone for me to shoot and execute. But you're dealing with that, and at the time you feel like pulling out a weapon and shooting him as well. But then I think to myself, that's not going to get us anywhere. So I'm looking at a ruthless animal, so to speak, but I've got to treat him as a human being. And if I can look at him as a human being, I can have a sensible conversation. Now, he may not be sensible coming back to you, and you meet people in life, in prison, and as you have outside the prison. People who have kidnapped one particular person kidnapped two girls, tied one to, raped both of them, tied one to a tree, and while he took the other girl down to the river, raped her, then strangled her to death, and then kept saying to the other girl tied to the tree, "I'm coming back for you." You can imagine what she was going through. And then he went back to the tree and did exactly the same. He killed them. And you look at that person, the justice for him is stringing him up for the highest pole. But if you've got to deal with that person, you've got to deal with him in a different way. You've got to think he's a human being, and I've got to forget about his atrocities. I've got to deal with this person, and this is how I'm going to deal with him. Talk about something that's more of interest to him, and you try and have a conversation, but you're trying to get information from him. And that's what you've got to do. It's extremely difficult. You do
Keith, you have such a unique insight and life experience, and it's so interesting that you're spending your time today in trying to reduce human trafficking. Such a big issue, and feels like it's not talked about enough given the sheer scale of the challenges there. Has there been a win for you, the story where you've taken someone very bad down, and that's brought you a great sense of satisfaction?
I think it's very hard to change the mentality of some of these people, extremely difficult. The satisfaction to me is rescuing someone from human trafficking, from a human trafficking cell. And I think the difference between myself and people who deal with victims of trafficking is I've actually been inside a human trafficking cell. I've seen how they operate, and I've also dealt with one particular girl in turning her into an informant for me, and then she's gone back inside to give me the information so we could try and rescue a lot of these girls. And the experience of this girl, and she wouldn't cooperate with us until such time as we rescued her mother. She was a single, just her and her mother. Her mother was in a village in Russia, so we had to get the mother out of the village in Russia into Germany. And once we had her in Germany, this girl then put her life on the line to give us information, and we're able to rescue her. The satisfaction I had rescuing her from the drug trafficker and her mum, and that was good. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a lot, but you deal with it. Sorry about that.
Keith, please don't apologise. And the world's a funny place. Everyone has their different journey, and we all help each other and in different ways. People have very varying degrees in which they can help, ways in which they're involved in society. Clearly, like today, you talk about a lot, and there's a lot you can't talk about, and navigating these things. I want to touch soon on, how you make sure Keith's doing good. But before we move on to Keith, how do you, because, so many people, they don't have a purpose, they don't have a skill set necessarily, they haven't found their purpose, rather. You are a man who, you've changed lives. You've been through such crazy times. We could talk for weeks and not cover it. Your journey and the sort of extraordinary tales it involves. But there's so much value you can bring to people. What's it like now? Because there must be so many people who want your help on projects. It might be tracking money that's been stolen, perhaps. Just so many different things, human trafficking cases. How does it work for you? Is it frustrating that you don't have enough time in the day to be involved in everything?
Yes, I agree with what you just said. I think you made a comment before on human trafficking, so I spoke to celebrities in Hollywood in regard to that, and it's taboo. They don't really want to talk about human trafficking, and I think it's something we should talk about. And to get support for human trafficking is extremely difficult, because last year alone, in 2025, according to the US Department of Justice, $13 billion was the money earned by human trafficking gangs. and there's so many people sold into human trafficking. I like to do a lot more, but you need an enormous amount of support, not only for government but from individuals, to talk about a bit more about human trafficking and the consequences of that. But yeah, and helping people find money. I get the odd call, I've lost money in cryptocurrency and I've been scammed. But the thing is that with banks and financial institutions, they just tick boxes. They really have. If you think about it, $1 trillion or more is washed through the global banking system. So from law enforcement agencies and from compliance officers and people involved in anti-money laundering and within the financial institutions, all they do is tick boxes. Banks at the end of the day make money, make profit. So as long as they're ticking the boxes, they're doing the right thing. But in terms of sophistication, money laundering activities, it's a big business and people are very good at it. And so if you've got a $50 million, you want to wash it through the banking system, it's easily done and people are doing it. And I think criminal groups today have become not only so sophisticated, become corporations, they're quite blasé about it, like driving the Ferraris, buying the $12 million homes, living in Dubai, semi-protected by corrupt officials. And yet the average man in the street is struggling, losing money, and you think, oh, how do you fix this problem? And you know what I'm doing right now, I'm studying a course called Global Financial Intelligence. So basically it's just like a certificate course, but it gives you modules of how you can become a very sophisticated compliance anti-money laundering person. There are so many courses out there for people in anti-money laundering, compliance courses, but they really don't understand how money is moved around the world. And so with criminal groups, particularly in the Middle East gangs, which operate the drug and the tobacco industry in Australia, we're the same as what happens in Scandinavia. It's the Middle Eastern groups, as it is in Germany. It's basically out of Turkey. But criminal groups today are earning a massive amount of money in terms of prostitution, drugs, human trafficking. They're the main key, and tobacco, of course. And all you can hear is government officials and government agencies say we need more resources, more people. They don't need more resources and more people. What the law enforcement need is the right people, the people with the right skills. And what banks could do is actually change the way where criminal money is flowed through the bank by employing the right people who understand how money is transferred through the banking system. And I'll give you an example. There's one large bank here in Australia. It has 1,200 people in its financial crime division. Other than the executive director, she said to me that other than herself, no one else in her department has 1% of my experience in order to detect any money laundering activities. Not 1% of my experience. And she said, I have basically 10% of your experience. So what banks are doing is employing people who say they've got all the academic qualifications, but they can't detect any financial fraud. And the worst case about it is we've got, like Jeffrey Epstein, we've got pedophiles who are making money through child pornography, and the banks are allowing those monies to be washed through the system. One of the major banks here was fined an enormous amount of money for allowing child pornography revenue to flow through the bank. So the point is, from a law enforcement background and from compliance, from financial institutions, unfortunately, we just don't employ the right people. And I'm not saying anything against the people who are employed. They have the academic skills, they have the skills, but unfortunately they just don't have the real life experience. And I'm no disrespect to them. They are very capable of what they're doing, but they don't really know what they're looking for because they've never really experienced. It's all from textbook or examples. It's like police and fraud. It's like the police can't detect a fraud investigation unless they've got pieces of the jigsaw. So they need to be given half of the jigsaw. And if they're given half of the jigsaw, they can then basically put the picture together. What intelligence organisations are given is one or two pieces of the jigsaw. In my case I'm not given any pieces of the jigsaw. I'm told what the problem is. Can you find one piece of the jigsaw and maybe build it to a picture? So that's the difference. This is a scenario. Can you find one piece of the jigsaw? So from the banks and law enforcement, they need half of the jigsaw completed before they can finish it. So if they get half of the jigsaw, they can then finish the jigsaw and pat themselves on the back. Intelligence, Mossad, CIA, British intelligence, MI5, MI6, get one or two pieces of jigsaw. Over a period of time, they'll put it together. But if you ask, we've got a scenario, we've got no pieces of jigsaw. Can you put that picture together? That's my job. That's the difference. And that's who the Colombian and the Mexican cartels use. They find that person who can actually put the jigsaw together. Russian mafia will do the same. So criminal organisations have enormous cash flow, are prepared to pay that money and prepared to get the right people. We got a scenario. Can you give us two pieces of that jigsaw? If you can solve the problem. From the police and from the banks, they need to pay. You just need one person who can build a small team. But you got to get the right people and then pay them an enormous amount of money. But at the same time, if you've got 1,200 to 1,500 in your financial crime division, but you end up employing 50 who actually know what they're doing, they will protect the bank and the bank will save themselves millions of dollars. I'm just giving you an example. I've been on both sides, from running a boutique investment bank and also dealing with us to find that one piece of the jigsaw. As a professor of Georgetown University said to me, and I provide lectures from them time to time, Keith, we know if you've given one piece of the jigsaw, you'll put the picture together. In some cases, I don't need one piece of that jigsaw. I just need to be told what the scenario is. Given time, I'll come up with that jigsaw.
Hey listeners, don't worry, the story does not end here. We've got another episode coming up in the future. All you need to do is subscribe to hear more. Hey listeners, you'll be able to hear part 2 of this episode coming out soon. All you need to do is subscribe and you'll get notified when the next episode comes out. Thanks so much for listening.